Today we're going to be talking about the social hierarchy and what it means to be a part of the social hierarchy, in addition to how it limits social mobility. Now, a lot of you probably already know the synopsis of what a social hierarchy is, but it's important to navigate oneself within a social environment using the consideration of essential skills for humans with the definition of a hierarchy. And this hierarchy is just basically knowing ranks. And of course, in our society, rank is dictated by none other than wealth.
So to put it simply, almost everybody around us is in the middle class, and they get everything except for, well, maybe a private jet. And then there's the 1%. There are a few of those around you, and the 0.001%, well, they rule the rest of the world.
Social hierarchy originated in India when the Aryans from Central Asia invaded South Asia and introduced the caste system as a means of controlling the local populations, and this system resulted in those with power being at the top and ruling all of the rest, and those who had to work for others being at the very bottom.
Additionally, the system of feudalism within European cultures from the 9th to 15th centuries allowed for structuring society around the owning of land and working or performing services for landowners. This was similar to the caste system in India developed by Aryans, but instead it was in Europe. This allowed for kings and authority figures to remain at the very top of the system, resulting in the 0.001% that we see today, followed by nobles, then knights, and of course peasants.
Another example of this is in India, where blood dictated whether or not you deserved rights, and this is seen carried out through the beings of gender and race. It's so easy to see within the diagram, as well as our society, the way in which politics, social statuses, and economics limit the people of not only America, but other developed and developing countries around the world.
The following is a clip that thoroughly explains the way in which the lacking social mobility has reflected itself over history and how this is seen today through statistics concerning race and gender.
More recent trends in social mobility have been less rosy. Since the 1970s, much of the economic growth and income has been at the top of the income distribution. Meanwhile, family incomes have been pretty flat for the rest of the population.
Pause. This diagram is super significant in our understanding of the way in which the highest of the highest can stay at the highest, and what that means for the rest of us. Does it mean we stay at the bottom, or is social mobility still applicable to anyone and everyone? How does this work? And what could we possibly be talking about if the lines are still visibly increasing?
For the rest of the population. This unequal growth in incomes has meant less absolute mobility for Americans. A recent analysis of tax data by a group of economists and sociologists found that absolute mobility has declined over.
And don't get me wrong.
Of course there's exceptions, but when you think about it, most of the people in power gaining the majority of the wealth that rules the entirety of society trickles down from the power and authority of white male figures. So how do we tell what everything is and how it counts?
We can measure social mobility quantitatively using measures of economic mobility, like by comparing your income to your parents' income at the same age. Or we can look at mobility using qualitative measures. A common measure used by sociologists is occupational status. If your father worked in a blue-collar job, what's the likelihood that you will too? A recent study of absolute intergenerational mobility found that about 1/3 of U.S. men will end up in the same type of job as their fathers.
Dividing the country into 5 rough groups of the top, bottom, and middle 20% groups, they asked people how they thought the wealth in this country was divided. Then he asked them what they thought was the ideal distribution. And 92%, that's at least 9 out of 10 of them, said it should be more like this. In other words, more equitable than they think it is. Now that fact is telling, admittedly, the notion that most Americans know that the system is already skewed unfairly. But what's most interesting to me is the reality compared to our perception. The ideal is as far removed from our perception of reality as the actual distribution is from what we think exists in this country. So ignore the ideal for a moment. Here's what we think it is again. And here is the actual distribution. shockingly skewed.
According to a study in the United States journal Science, 92% of children who were born in the year 1940 earned more than their parents did. However, only 50% of the individuals born in the year 1984 can say that they have earned or will earn more than their parents. This is a 42% decrease in social mobility, and this further supports the idea that the so-called American dream is now a dream which will not be achieved by more than 50% of Americans today. Michael D. Carr and Emily E. Wiemers, both economists at the University of Massachusetts, recently published a study which proves that it is growing more and more difficult to move up the so-called social ladder. In this study, they state that it is increasingly the case that no matter your education level or background, where you start is essential for where you end with regards to the current social and economic hierarchy that exists in the United States today. Together, this information demonstrates that the social hierarchy that is currently in place in the United States is a main part of what is limiting social mobility in the United States as well. Our social hierarchy creates a cycle where those who have money and opportunities to be successful remain in these positions, and by staying wealthy and in power, these individuals' children are born into a family that is of a high social and economic status. By being born into this, these children will not have to work as hard to get into a good school, and they won't have to study as hard to graduate and get a job because they are already of a higher status at birth than most Americans will be after working hard all of their life. This is because those who have to work hard often come from less and have to prove themselves by working hard in order to make a better life for themselves and for their family. Another way of thinking about the current social hierarchy in the United States is to imagine that you and your friends are playing Monopoly. In the game Monopoly, everybody starts the same way, and what you choose to spend your money on is entirely up to you, and it varies from person to person. Some might choose to spend all of their money buying every property when they land on it. However, others may choose to plan ahead and think about specific properties that they want to buy. Either way, it almost always escalates to the point where one person has a majority of the money, and the other players are afraid of landing on a space with their property because they do not have enough money to pay the rich. This is why the rich will stay rich and the poor will continue to lose money in the game of Monopoly, as well as in the social hierarchy in the United States. This is somewhat similar to the social hierarchy and social mobility situation today, except to accurately portray the United States society in Monopoly, one player would start with 1,000 Monopoly dollars, another would start with 500 Monopoly dollars, and another player would start with only 10 Monopoly dollars. This would represent the distinct socioeconomic classes present in the United States hierarchy. In either situation, the end result is the same. One person ends up dominating and has most, if not all of the money, and they end up continuing to make money, while those who do not have money continue to lose what little money they have. This demonstrates again the lack of social mobility for those who are not in the high classes in the United States, as those who have wealth will continue to get wealthier while those who do not have a lot of money will continue to lose money. Americans love rags to riches stories. Take Oprah Winfrey, for example. She was born in a small town in Mississippi to parents who had little money, and now she is a media star who is also a multi-billionaire. Or take Howard Schultz, a man whose name you might not know, but whose company you have definitely seen before. Howard was a worker on a Brooklyn housing project, and he is now the chief executive officer of the internationally recognized coffee company, Starbucks. The reason that these rags to riches stories are brought up so frequently is because Americans need to be able to think of these stories quickly so that they are able to have hope and believe that they are still possible, because the chances of moving up in society now in such a drastic way are slim to none. This is a result of the way that society is set up, where those who are in the high classes stay that way. This should not come as a surprise, as society has been this way for thousands of years, and this structure has been dispersed all throughout the world. And today, we are merely repeating history as we continue to not make any changes to this structure, which causes more problems than it fixes. As long as this structure and hierarchy is in place, there will continue to be less social mobility and chances for Americans in particular to obtain anything even remotely close to a rags to riches stories. Now people are settling for a rags to a getting by story.